I booked the place last minute. It was just one night, nothing fancy, and the Airbnb photos made it look clean enough. After a long drive, I finally pulled into the small neighborhood. It was quiet. Too quiet for a Friday night. Most houses were dark, and the one I rented stood out with a single porch light flickering like it hadn't been replaced in years. I punched in the code the host had sent me, and the door unlocked without a problem. Inside, the air felt strangely heavy. The furniture looked older than the photos, and for some reason the kitchen light was already on. I brushed it off. Maybe the host forgot to turn it off when cleaning. I dropped my bag by the couch and started looking around. That's when I noticed something that didn't sit right with me. The bedroom door upstairs was shut. In the listing pictures, it had been open. I froze for a moment, staring up at it. My gut told me not to check, but the thought of someone being there made my skin crawl. I grabbed my phone, pretending to scroll through messages just to calm myself down. Then, clear as day, I heard the faint sound of a floorboard creak above me, coming from that very room. My stomach dropped, and then, the sound of slow, steady footsteps moving toward the top of the stairs. I stood frozen at the bottom of the stairs, staring up at the darkness. My first thought was that maybe the host had left something or someone else inside by mistake, but that made no sense. I had the code. The place was mine for the night. I stood frozen at the bottom of the stairs, staring up at the darkness. My first thought was that maybe the host had left something or someone else inside by mistake, but that made no sense. I had the code. The place was mine for the night. The footsteps stopped. Silence filled the house. I slowly reached for my bag near the couch, pulling out the small flashlight I kept for traveling. My thumb shook as I clicked it on and aimed it up the stairs. Nothing. I took one step forward, the wooden floor creaking under me. Then another. My chest tightened with every sound echoing through the quiet house. By the time I reached the middle of the staircase, I could see the bedroom door clearly. It was still shut. I raised my hand to the knob, debating whether I should open it or just leave right then. That's when I heard it, whispering, low, broken, like someone talking to themselves inside that room. I backed away slowly, my hand trembling so badly the flashlight beam shook across the walls. My first thought was to get out, call the police, maybe even the host. But just as I turned toward the front door, I heard the knob upstairs begin to turn. Someone, or something, was opening it from the inside. The bedroom door creaked open, slow and deliberate. I didn't wait to see who or what was inside. I sprinted down the stairs and grabbed my bag. My hands fumbled with the lock, but I finally yanked the front door open and bolted outside. I didn't look back until I was halfway down the street. The house sat still, porch light flickering, windows dark. It almost looked empty, like nothing had ever been inside. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. I called the host from my car, my voice shaking. When she finally picked up, I told her someone was in the house. She went silent for a long time, then finally said in a flat tone, "That's impossible. No one's been in there since the last guest. 6 months ago." I hung up without replying. My gut told me to get far away, so I drove straight through the night until I found a cheap motel off the highway. Later, curiosity got the better of me. I checked the Airbnb listing again. The photos were gone. The entire page had been deleted, but I can't shake the memory of those footsteps and the whispering voice that was waiting for me upstairs. I rented the cabin for a weekend getaway just to clear my head. It was small, cheap, and isolated, exactly what I thought I needed. The listing showed cozy pictures of a wood-paneled interior, a fireplace, and a little balcony overlooking the trees. What it didn't show, though, was the heavy wooden door at the end of the hallway upstairs. When I arrived, the place looked normal enough. The host had left the key under a fake rock by the steps, and there was a short handwritten note on the kitchen counter that simply said, "Enjoy your stay." But the house felt colder than it should have, even with the heater running. After setting my bags down, I explored the rooms. Living room, kitchen, bathroom, nothing unusual. But upstairs, after passing the bedroom I'd be using, I found that door. It was shut tight, with a rusted old lock holding it closed. Unlike the others, it had no handle, just a keyhole. I crouched down to peek through it, but the hole was stuffed with something, maybe paper or cloth. Still, standing there gave me a strange chill, as if someone had been on the other side just moments before. That night, after making dinner and trying to relax with a movie, I kept hearing faint noises. At first, I thought it was just the wood creaking from the cold, but then I noticed something else. The sounds always came from upstairs. It was past midnight when I finally turned everything off and went to bed. The forest outside was silent. No wind, no animals, nothing. I pulled the blankets over myself and closed my eyes. And that's when I heard it. A single knock. Slow, heavy. Coming from the other side of the locked door. I woke up around 3 in the morning, heart racing. At first I didn't know why, but then I realized the sound that had dragged me out of sleep. Faint scratching, slow and irregular, coming from upstairs. It wasn't like an animal clawing at the wood. It was deliberate, like fingers dragging across the door. I sat up in bed, straining my ears. The scratching would stop, then return. Longer this time, scraping from top to bottom. I wanted to believe it was my imagination, or maybe old wood shifting in the cold, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. I slipped quietly out of bed and grabbed my phone. The screen's glow was the only light as I tiptoed toward the hallway. I paused at the foot of the stairs, listening. The sound was gone now. Just silence, so heavy it pressed against my chest. I almost went back to bed, but then something else made me freeze. A shadow moved under the crack of the locked door. I swear I saw it. Dark, shifting, like someone pacing slowly back and forth inside that room. My stomach twisted. No one was supposed to be here but me. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of my tired eyes, but when the shadow stopped, I heard a soft exhale, like a person letting out a long, shaky breath. That was enough. I backed down the stairs, grabbed my bag from the living room, and thought about leaving right then. But outside, the forest was pitch black, and the road was miles of dirt in the middle of nowhere. I convinced myself it was safer to wait until daylight. Back in bed, I pulled the blankets up to my chin, phone clutched in my hand like a weapon. I stayed like that for what felt like hours, until exhaustion finally pulled me back under. When morning came, I told myself it had to be a dream, a weird, half-awake hallucination. But when I went upstairs again, the sight waiting for me turned my stomach inside out. The lock on the mysterious door was now unlatched. I stood there staring at the lock that was clearly undone. I hadn't touched it. I knew I hadn't. My first instinct was to leave immediately, but something inside me wanted answers. Maybe it was stupidity, maybe stubbornness, but I couldn't stop myself from reaching for the door. My hand shook as I wrapped my fingers around the edge of the wood and slowly pushed it open. The hinges groaned like they hadn't moved in years. Inside was a small, empty room. Bare walls, dusty floor, no furniture at all. The only thing out of place was a set of footprints in the dust, circling the center of the room. They were fresh. I stepped back, my heart pounding in my ears. That's when I noticed the smell. Faint, sour, like old sweat and damp clothes. It clung to the air even though the room was bare. Suddenly a sound came from behind me, the creak of a floorboard, just one step, slow and heavy. I spun around, flashlight beam shaking across the hallway. Nothing. But the air felt different, colder, like someone had just passed me. I slammed the door shut, forcing the lock back into place. My breathing was ragged, my thoughts scattered, but one thing was clear. I couldn't stay another second. I grabbed my stuff, threw it into the car, and sped down the dirt road without even checking if I had packed everything. Halfway back to town, I pulled over at a gas station. My hands were still trembling as I typed a message to the host, demanding an explanation. Hours later, I got a reply. Just one sentence. "You weren't supposed to open that door." I never went back. And to this day, I can still hear the sound of that long, shaky breath on the other side of the wood, like whoever was in that room is still waiting, pacing, scratching at the walls. I'd been on the road for hours, exhausted and desperate for rest when I finally pulled up to the rental house. It was listed on a site similar to Airbnb, advertised as a quiet country escape. The photos showed a charming two-story home with a porch and a big field stretching out behind it. The price had been almost too good to be true, but at that point, I didn't care. The directions led me down a winding dirt road with no streetlights and barely any cell signal. By the time I arrived, the sun had set, and the only light came from the soft yellow glow in the upstairs window. That was strange. I hadn't checked in yet, and the listing mentioned no other guests. I assumed the host had left a light on for me. The key was supposed to be under the doormat. I bent down, found a small rusted tin instead, and inside was a single brass key. The lock turned stiffly like it hadn't been used in years. When I stepped inside, dust filled my nose. The air was stale, heavy, as though no one had lived there for a long time. Still, the furniture was in place, the bed neatly made, and a welcome note sat on the kitchen counter. Make yourself at home. The handwriting was strange, jagged, almost rushed. I tried to relax, dropped my bag on the couch, and started walking through the house. Every floorboard creaked under my weight. The upstairs hallway felt longer than it should have been, doors lining both sides, most of them shut tight. At the very end was the room with the glowing light seeping from underneath. I hesitated. Maybe the host had forgotten something. Maybe someone else was staying here. My pulse quickened as I reached for the knob, but when I opened the door, the light clicked off instantly, and the room was empty. I stood in the doorway, my hand still gripping the knob. The room was empty. Bare walls, wooden floor, no lamp, no light bulb, nothing that could have cast that glow I'd seen from outside. My skin prickled as I stepped inside, phone flashlight cutting through the darkness. The air in there felt colder and the silence was suffocating. I swept the light across the floor. Dust everywhere, except for one clear set of footprints leading from the center of the room to the window. They weren't mine. I backed out quickly, slamming the door shut. My chest was tight, thoughts racing. Maybe the host had been in here earlier. But if that was true, why hadn't I seen a car outside? Why leave footprints in a room with no furniture, no purpose? Trying to convince myself it was just nerves, I went back downstairs and heated some instant noodles in the microwave. The hum of the machine was oddly comforting. I sat at the small wooden table and kept telling myself everything was fine. That's when I noticed the photos on the wall. At first glance, they looked like generic countryside pictures, but the longer I stared, the more I realized they weren't landscapes. They were houses, old houses, abandoned looking. Each one had a person standing in the doorway, their face blurred or scratched out. I felt sick. I tried not to look at them, focusing on my food instead. But then, from upstairs, came the unmistakable sound of a door closing. Not loud, just a dull click. I froze, spoon halfway to my mouth. Slowly, I stood and grabbed my phone again. My battery was under 20%, but I turned on the flashlight and stepped into the hallway. The house was dead silent. I forced myself up the stairs, every step echoing. When I reached the top, all the doors were shut tight again, including the one I had left open just minutes ago. Something was in there with me, something that didn't want me to leave. I stood at the top of the stairs, my chest tight, phone trembling in my hand. Every door was shut again, like the house was trying to erase what I had seen. I whispered to myself that it was just old wood, just drafts, anything to keep moving. I forced myself to the nearest door and yanked it open. Empty room. Next one. Empty. My breathing was ragged as I moved down the hall, opening each one. All of them the same. Dust, bare floors, silence. Until I reached the last, the room with the footprints. The door groaned as I pushed it open. My light swept across the floor. The prints were gone, wiped clean, like no one had ever been there. My throat went dry. I turned to leave, but that's when I heard it. Footsteps, faint but deliberate, coming from downstairs. I leaned over the railing, phone light shaking. Nothing. Just the front door, shut tight. Then I saw it. On the kitchen table, where my half-eaten food sat, There was a piece of paper that hadn't been there before. I walked down slowly, every nerve screaming at me to run. The note was written in the same jagged handwriting as the one that had welcomed me earlier. Only this time it said, "You should have never come here." That was enough. I bolted for the door, shoving the key in my pocket as I ran to my car. I didn't look back at the house, didn't check the windows. I drove until the dirt road turned into pavement and didn't stop until I hit the next town. When I tried to report it, the rental site told me the listing didn't exist anymore. No host, no property, nothing. Like it had been erased overnight. But I can still see it in my head. The upstairs window glowing faintly when I first arrived. And I wonder if whoever was inside is still waiting there now for the next guest who thinks they found a bargain.